I'm seeing a few faces. All right, just keep your cameras turned on, guys, okay? I-turn ano yung camera para... Okay, thank you. All right, so makita rin yung screen?
Yes,
Kita
sir.
sir.
Makita, sir.
Yes, sir.
All right, so maybe you've already noticed the topic today. It's going to be about variables. Let me just
Good morning, sir.
let me start the recording now and then start tracking the attendance. Hold on. Test. Okay. Start recording. All right. Again, good morning, everyone. Welcome to another online class in continuation to
Morning, sir.
our
Morning, sir.
programming lesson. Good morning. All right. Okay, so this class will be recorded. This is to give chance to other students who won't be able to attend today's class. So they will be able to replay or watch the replay, or you can also do the same. All right, so for today's topic, we'll be talking about variables. So last meeting, we've already discussed or we've already tried using C++, basically writing simple codes or simple programs. This time around, we're going to make a program that is a little more useful, right? That will be through the introduction of variables. So who among you would like to give us an idea what do you think variable is all about? We already experienced that before in our previous years. Would you mind giving us some example or let's say a short input about what do you think would be variables are? Anyone?
Try
Sir,
sir.
Ilamal.
Princess Anila, go ahead.
Kuan, sir. Ko- Containers for storing data.
Okay, all right, that's good. Okay, that's actually true. But unsay sa atong kuan ba sa previous years na to in mathematics, what do you think variables po? Anyone? That's true. Nila, that's true. Kinsa tong race sa ilang hand wala ko kabantay. Ano mo mawala dayon. Okay. Open queue. Hold on. Gideon, go ahead.
Kuan, sir, kaning exchange value ang variable, sir.
Mm-hmm. Okay. That's good. That's true. Okay. So basically, variable. We use variable during our mathematics in our previous years. We use variable if there are some certain numbers or values that we don't know yet. Diba? For example, we are trying to compute the Pythagorean theorem, and we only given two sides of the triangle. So for us to be able to solve the other one, we have to compute it using the Pythagorean theorem, but we don't know how to solve. We don't know to solve the other side if wala ta kabalo sa duwa ka side, di ba? Or something like that. So if there are uncertainty about the values that we'll be using for the equation, or let's say in this case in the program, we use variables. Okay, so it is in programming, variables are temporary data storage. Just like in mathematics, variables store values. In this case, in programming, variables also stores data temporarily. So if you have any questions or clarifications all throughout the class, just um, click raise hand inside Google Meet. I may also just directly send it in the in chat or in message here in Google Meet as well. Just a review. Last meeting we discussed about C++. So basically, I've introduced to you. We were introduced with the C++ programming language, how to install C++, and then creating our very first C++ program, and of course, creating our very first function, which is output. Okay. So would anyone please share with us how to install C++ on mobile? On mobile. Let's start with mobile. Who would like to share? Just a review. How to install C++. Kita to, nawala dayon. Just go ahead. Kita ni Ray sa ilang hand. Nawala dayon. Again, sa mobile lang sa mobile.
Sir, ako sir.
Go ahead, Bartolome.
Sir, first, video na Bisaya, sir.
Sure. Pwede kayo.
Una, sir, mato ka sa Play Store, sir. Dayo, i-search mo ng C++, sir. Tapos, dito to mo nung na-install dito, sir. Tapos, wala to mo siya pag mag-loading, sir. Pag mahuman siya loading, sir, dito na mo, pwede namin siya magamit, sir.
Okay. Unsang application gani?
C++, sir.
Is that true, guys? Is it true? C++?
No, sir.
Atong devs, no. CXX Droid. Okay. CXX Droid. Okay, that's true. Thank you. How about for desktop or laptop computers? Anyone? Okay, Junessa.
Wait. To start writing a program, you have to start by creating a new project. Go to File or New. Wait, di mausa.
Sige.
Ano to, sir?
They can question kay how to start man. How to start working with C++. So,
Okay.
okay, sige, go ahead. How to install, kumbaga.
To start writing a program, you have to start by creating a new project. Go to File or New Project, then select Console Application. Under the Basic tab, click the C++ project. Enter the project name and click OK. You will be prompted to select where you want to save the project. Click Save. You can now begin working on your very first C++ program.
Okay, thank you. Unsa nga application itong gamiton, Janessa?
Kuan sir, kanang ito? Wait sir.
Are you using
Use
desktop
dev-
or laptop or are you using phone?
Sir?
Unsa imong gigamit di ay laptop or computer, cellphone?
Kuan sir, Android phone.
Android. Okay. All right, anyone unsay atong gamiton nga application for Windows or for computers?
Dev C++.
Dev C++. All right. Okay, so that's easy. We just have to install the IDEs or integrated development environments for both Android and Windows, and we'll be able to start working with our first C++ program. So, may gani na ay mga IDE, but some other programmers prefer not to use IDE. The IDEs that we are using are already bundled with compilers, but some programmers prefer to just write the codes on a text editor and then install another compiler. Galisod-lisod kinabuhi. But the good thing about Dev C++ and CXX Droid is that the application itself has its own bundled compiler. Therefore, we don't necessarily have to install any other program, just the IDE itself. Right, so today we'll talk about variables. What exactly are variables in programming? And then, of course, once we talk about variables, we'll be talking about data types. What exactly are data types, and why is it important in programming? And then identifiers, and then how to define, declare, and initialize a variable. So these are the topics that we'll be talking about today, and hopefully you'll be taking down notes. This is going to be a little bit harder than our last meeting. If this is the first time that you encounter programming, medyo maglisod tagamay compared sa atong previous na topic, but it's not gonna be very hard. So long as you'll be able to understand what I'm talking about, you'll be able to catch up. I promise you. Okay, so please take note of the things that we'll be doing, and then so later on we're going to practice using variables in programming. But before anything else, let's have a exercise, brain exercise. It's always good to practice segregating waste properly. Let us dispose of the waste below in appropriate waste bin. Okay, so I have here a list of waste that we have to put out, and then below are trash cans containing biodegradable, non-biodegradable, and hazardous. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to select each of these waste here and then choose asa dapat ibutang either sa biodegradable, non-biodegradable, or hazardous. Let's start with the first one. Use tissues, paper towels, napkins. Would like to share asa nato dapat ibutang? Anthony. Go ahead. Oh, yes. Let's start with the first one. Use tissues. Biodegradable paper towel. All right. Oh, unsa dyan? Unsa asa to ibutang? Biodegradable. Napkins. All right. Because tissues, paper towels, it's a little hard for us to biodegradable. Okay. Wala man tayo recyclable. Hold on. Yes. All right. It's true. All right. Let me highlight it out. So that's gonna be biodegradable. So let's be. All right. Next, mask plastic gloves. Anyone? Gideon.
Sir.
Go ahead, Gideon.
Sa non-biodegradable, sir. Kay composite of
Plastic gloves.
materials.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. So that's true. Non-biodegradable. Hot drink cups. Anyone? Miguel. Sige, go ahead, Miguel.
Sa non-biodegradable, sir.
Yeah.
Non-biodegradable.
Yes, because ang gamito na kay tuman ng styrofoam sa
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
styrofoam na. All right. Okay, thank you. Next, cold drink cups, straws. Hamlet.
Non-biodegradable, sir.
Okay, non-biodegradable. And then plastic or foil wrappers. Rachel. Madungog niyo si Rachel? Hinay ka itingog niya.
In my case, sir.
Dili mo daw.
Hindi madungog.
Ulitin.
Answer non-biodegradable.
Okay. All right. Okay, thank you. Rachel. All right. Next, drink pouches and straws. Anyone? Line up with Rochelle. Rochelle Romualdo.
Non-biodegradable, sir.
Yeah, that's true. Non-biodegradable. So almost non-biodegradable. Tanan. Okay, next, candles and wax. Chansai.
Biodegradable, sir.
Candles and wax. Good. Anza?
Um,
Biodegradable?
biodegradable.
Biodegradable as cigarette butts, guys. Di ko sure. Honestly.
Hazard, sir.
Hazard.
Uban, sir. Ubang
Hazardous.
kapanigi.
Siguro. Let's put it
Recycle nila.
let's put it to hazardous because of the ashes and cigarette butts and the
Hazard man na siya, sir. Kay
hazardous.
tungod sa ashes niya, sir.
That's true. Okay. Next, gum packages, blister packs.
Hazard, sir.
Ngalan akong kita. All right, that's true. Gum packages naman.
Hazard,
So
sir.
it's ano man, anong hazardous ang gum packages? Non-biodegradable lang. Non-biodegradable. Light bulbs, dishes, Meiji Kancho, Akacho. Right.
Hazardous, sir.
Okay, hazardous. Obviously, no? Masamad na. Next, metallic gift wrap and bows. Bows? Junessa.
Hazardous, sir.
Okay. Hazardous. Metallic gift wrap. Hazardous ba? Hazardous ba ang metallic gift wrap and bows?
None.
Metallic gift wrap. Di ba kato na? Di na. Ano metallic gift wrap? Ako idea. Ako rin galing research good.
Ito na yung silver namin.
So dili siya hazardous, di ba? Non-biodegradable.
Katong murag foil ka siya, sir.
Biodegradable lagi na, sir.
Ano?
Non-biodegradable, sir.
None, sir.
Metallic
None.
naman.
Hindi na malata, sir.
And then broken mugs and dishes. May, Tano.
Hazard.
Sir. Hazardous.
Ha- hazardous.
And then feminine hygiene products.
Something, sir. Masarap. Non-biodegradable.
Okay, non-biodegradable. All right, so we have only one biodegradable, and then a lot of non-biodegradable, and then three hazardous. Okay, so basically, by
Asa ka?
pakimute na lang, balik. All right. Okay, thank you. Okay, so why are we doing this? What is its significance to programming or in variables? So notice that by understanding the different types of waste, uh, we 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 segregate them depending on the type, whether or not the waste are biodegradable, non-biodegradable, or hazardous. So we're able to segregate it by understanding its type. All right. So that's the same thing in variables, especially when we'll be using data types. We have to understand the values that a variable may contain so we can declare it with a proper data type. The same with segregating this waste, we're able to segregate them separately according to its type, whether it's going to be biodegradable, non-biodegradable, or hazardous waste. All right. So since we know exactly how to differentiate or how to segregate these types of waste, then I think it would be easy for us to differentiate the different data so that we can use it. So we can use it for for segregate, not segregating, for understanding the data types later on that we'll be discussing. So let's talk about variables. At this point of our academic experience, we should have heard and encountered the term variable. Is that true? Nakadug na tag variables before?
Yes, sir.
All right,
Yes, sir.
especially mathematics. Right now, I think na po yung mathematics, di ba? Just like you said, maganina.
Sir, na may
Right.
math,
And-
sir.
Okay, this is let me share you something about mathematics. Ako, I am a student who loves math. When I was in high school, as much as possible, it na ako a chance nga mo attend og mga math competition outside school. I present myself. Dili ko top sa klase, but I present myself. I often get picked. But the longer the longer that I was exposed, kana bang nagsige na lamang kog math inana, murag nalato ko ba? So, I thought when I enrolled in IT, IT nabitan na so maka-exist na ko og math. Boy, was I wrong. There are total
Hindi
of
ka po nga
25
makaipos
units.
og math.
25 units tanan ang
Sabi na
mathematics sa mo ang curriculum. Naayo sa ka semester nga duha ka buk ng mathematics, usa ka major na ina na ba? So kulang na ana pa to ako ang math professor namo sa una. Kulang na lang mi og I think 9 units. Then pwede na may mahimong math majors. Ana ba? 9 units na lang math major na ang mga IT sa una. I'm not sure pila ka units inyong mathematics ron.
Tulo.
Tulo. At total ba tanan? Wa pa mo kabalo? Ha? Oo, kabalo mo? Pila siguro?
Na, sir.
Wala pa. Naman sa yung perspectives po. Yeah. If na, paki-check. Ang asa una is 25 units overall. Tag 3-3. Then may usa ka 5 units which is katong calculus, trigonometry rather. 5 units. So kada adlaw may magklase ug math. All right. So obviously since we are IT and you are in since IT mo, we know exactly what variables are. Regardless if IT or not, but there are a greater chance nga mas nakabalo mo of variables because we are IT. But again, at this point of our academic experience, we should have heard and encountered the term variable. Again, in mathematics, it temporarily, or not temporarily, but it allows us to replace a certain value that we don't know with letters or something like that. Whether in algebra, geometry, just about any branch of mathematics, it's usually the symbol for representing an unknown value. Diba? Find x. Nga find man si x, nga x na gani. One notable example is the use of variables in the Pythagorean theorem. What do you mean? Para asan yung Pythagorean theorem? Kinsa maka-share? Unsa lang ni siya? Kinsa maka-share ba? The theory of computing. Parang saan ni siya? When do we use Pythagorean theorem? Kinsa kay nung Wala. All right. The Pythagorean theorem is used to compute the sides of a triangle. All right. So this is the triangle. So if this is let's say 5 meters, this is let's say 4 meters. What is the value of this side? All right. So we will use Pythagorean theorem. So Pythagorean theorem is maybe one of the most notable example of equations, mathematical equation that uses variables. So here, since we don't know what is the value of either of these sides, then we will replace it with some kind of letters that will represent temporarily on the unknown value. So for example, if this is A, this is B, then it is C squared equals A squared plus B squared, something like that. Or sakto ba? Nalimot ako. Something like that. A variable is a portion of memory that stores data values that our program can manipulate. So it's similar, of course, it's similar to how we use variables in mathematics. Variable is a portion of memory that stores data so that we can manipulate in our program. Each variable in C++ has a specific type, which the size, layout, range of values, and set of operations that can be applied to the variable. The difference between the variable between mathematics and programming is that mathematics can only store numerical value. So in math, let me write it down here. Variables can store numerical value. Am I right? Sakto ba? Numerical values lang siya, just like atong ganina, atong how to find this side of the triangle. So dili man ang side sa triangle is really a number. Dili man siya ingon nga di man siya text, dili siya characters, dili siya symbols. It's numbers. And the variables in programming, however, can store rather in programming. Variables can store, all right, different data types. What do you mean by data types? This includes either text, numbers, words, group of words, letters, so on and so forth. So not just numerical value, but just about any data that we can use in our computers. All right. So what are the different data that we are using? If we want to compute something, that's numerical value. If we want to read a text, basically that's a text. If you want to type in letters, let's say mo take tag exam and choose the right multiple choice, then we are using letters. That's also we can also use variables for that. So in programming, we can use the different data types, unlike in mathematics that we can only store numerical value. That's the difference between them. So when do we use variables? All right, kano sa tamo gamit ng variables in programming? We will use variables in our C++ programs once we are going to deal with any data that our program will use. And for that, we are going to set a variable for each and every data being dealt as much as possible. So basically, we'll be using variables if we are going to make programs that are a little more useful. Let's say, for example, if you want to create a program that will compute the number, if you want to create a program that will compute the sum or the arithmetic value of two numbers, all right. So first of all, you have to create a variable for the first number. Let's call it num1. That's one variable, and then the second number, let's call it num2, and then third variable for the result. Since we don't know unsa lang ang i-enter sa user, di ba? Since the program that we are trying to create is a calculator. So obviously, we can expect that the user may enter different numbers. Diba? Lahi-lahi ang iyahang numbers na i-enter. Now, how do we make sure that our program will work every time even though like lahi ang number nga gi-enter sa user? That's the time that we'll be using variables to temporarily store those numbers that the user entered. So for example, ang user 1 i-enter siya og 3 for num1. And then for num2 ini-enter siya 5. So the result is 8 because the result is going to be the sum of 3 plus 5. Now, the next user may enter different number. The next user may enter 8 and 6. That will also return a different result. Diba? Lahi-lahi ang pwedeng i-enter sa users. That's why we are going to use variables to make sure that our program will still work every time even though lahi-lahi ang i-enter nga data from the users. Okay? Nag-gets ang idea? Why do we use variables? Nag-gets siya? Or should I explain it again? Do you follow, guys?
Explain again, sir.
Okay. Good. All right. Seryoso? All right, it's okay. Again, for example, let me erase this all para. Okay, let me erase this all. So again, why do we use variables in programming? So let's say we are going to create a program that will compute the average of 3 numbers. So how many numbers are we going to compute?
3.
3. How do we get the variable of how do we get the average of 3 numbers? So obviously we're going to use variables because we don't know what are the numbers that the users will enter. So for example, di matamo create a program nga pa usa ra ka gamit, di ba? We have to create a program that can be used as much as possible. So let's say the first user, i-enter siya og 5, 6, and 7. So that's good. So basically our program will compute the average. However, the next time that you're going to use it, dako kayo nga chance nga lahi na pud nga number ang imong i-enter, di ba? Let's say the next number that you're going to enter is going to be 6, 7, and 8, and then so on. So it wouldn't be very practical if every time that we're going to create a program, it will only cater these numbers, di ba? Dili mo make sense nga mo create tag program nya kanira iya i-compute. What if mo enter og laing nga number ang user? Di ba? So since we don't know the numbers that the users are going to enter to our program, we will use variables to replace this temporarily. All right. So if we're going to compute the value of, if we're going to compute the average of 3 numbers, how many variables are we expecting to use? Pila siguro ka variable?
3, sir.
3. All right. It's a
5.
who would agree? 3.
4, sir.
Nganong 4 man? Go ahead. Nganong 4? Kinsa to? Bartolome to? That's true. The answer is 4, but why?
Apil ang answer na anak, sir, sa variable.
That's
Sir,
right. Because of the
ang
result.
answer na sa day, kaupat man, sir.
It's true. Since we don't know the value of the numbers nga i-enter sa user, obviously we also don't know the value of the result. So in this case, let's say for example, what is the average of 5, 6, and 7? What do you think is the answer? So that's 5 plus 6, 11,
18.
18 divided by, what is the average?
So,
Go ahead, dali. All right, it's 5 plus 6 plus 7, that's 18 divided by 3, because there are 3 numbers, that is 6, right?
6.
The average is 6. All right, so that's the reason why we have to use variables. So because we can't expect that the user will keep on entering these numbers only. Lahi ang number nga iyang i-enter. So how do we make sure that our program will work every time? We're going to use variables. Okay, so in creating variables, all right, our goal is to reserve a storage in a program where the data will be stored in, so it can be used in the program. My note here doesn't make any sense, but what I'm trying to say is we are going to store the numbers temporarily on our program, on our computer, For example, this one right here, so that we can use it at a later time. It can be manipulated within the program itself. All right, we can either compute them, whatever it is that we want to do. Okay. So in another thing to take note, sakto ba, when creating or when writing variables is that we can write whatever we want. Okay. Although of course na may exception, but let's just say that writing the variable name is something that we can just do it ourselves. Just like in mathematics, that let's say find x, y, z, so on and so forth, or let's say a, b, c, so on. In programming, we can use whatever words we want. We can either use words, we can use one letter, we can use numbers. It would be totally up to us. So just like this is an example of a variable, and this is also a variable. So we can use words, multiple letters or numbers in writing variable. So unlike atong common nato sa mathematics na we're only using x, y, and z, a, b, c, something like that. In programming, we can use words. All right, take note of that. Just like this, num1, num2, and then sum. Pero na ibang mga words nga dili nato pwedeng gamiton because they are reserved in C++ libraries. We'll talk more about it in just a moment. So this is an example of a variable in finding the sum of two numbers. So we'll first create our first variable as num1. This is going to be our first variable. And then this is second variable. And since we are trying to compute the sum of two numbers, obviously, we want to store the sum somewhere. Kailangan po tamo store of variable, or we have to make a space for the sum, for the result. So that's why we'll have our third variable. So these are all variables. Let me erase all of it. And then once you already stored the variables in your program or in the computer, you can do whatever you want to do with it. In this case, we added both the first kane and this one right here for us to be able to generate the result, which is the sum. So again, since these are variables, we can store any numbers that we would like, that we want. So it could be either, for example, 2 plus 3. Obviously, once it will be added, then the result is 5. We can store any other numbers, let's say 1080, 920, or something like that. It will be totally up to us, and then the result will automatically be rendered. So since we use variable, there are no limit as to what numbers are we going to enter, because we used variable to store whatever number we want. So another example of variable is this. So ganina, puro numbers, and in mathematics, puro numbers ang atong gina-store sa atong variables. But this time, we can also, in programming, we can also store letters, symbols, and just about any other data type. That's the good thing about programming. It's not limited to numbers only, but it can store multiple data types. In this case, we use text or group of letters. Okay, so we can also store group of letters, words, single letters, symbols, characters, etc. Okay, so this time, let's try to create our very first program using variable. Let's try to take a look na lang sa. Let's take a look at this codes right here. This is an example of a program that will compute the sum of two numbers. So this program will compute and display the sum of 5 and 6. Since we declared that the variable a is 5 and the variable b is 6, this time we initialized a value. So here we initialize three variables, like I said, a, b, and sum. One for the first number, which is 5, then the second number, which is 6, and then the sum. Basically, it is just like we just reserve a storage for all the numbers 5, 6, and the sum, so that the program will be able to use it. In this case, the program used it to compute and display the result. So in this case, we used variables a, b, and then sum but we initialized value, meaning it will only compute 5 and 6, and then the sum. So it's very easy, but maybe that's the easiest way on how we're going to use variables in programming. Nagets ra niya ang code siguro without running this? Nagets ra? Or do you want me to run this code?
Sige, try ko na, sir.
Ayan.
I-run daw, sir.
Lang na to.
Read up, sir.
Para sige.
Try ko na, grand, sir.
Sige, sure. So we're going to create a simple program that will compute the value of compute the sum of two numbers. So first, file, new, project, console application, C++, let's say, variables. Asan tong C++ program? First semester, computer program, C++ program. Alright, ang sa tayo sulat na ito dere? Include IOStream, then anyone would like to help
Namespace.
Using namespace, sir.
using
Standard.
STD? Alright, it's okay.
Using
Let me just finish it up
namespace
para madali ta. But make sure you already memorize this, okay? Especially kaning first 6 lines or kaning lines. Make sure you've already memorize this part right here. Okay, so diri nato ibot atong code. So first is we're going to declare, okay? And for the meantime, just try to follow through, and then we'll discuss more about variables in just a moment. But the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to declare a variable. How to declare variable? We'll talk more about it. But basically, we're going to first write the data type. Again, we'll discuss in just a moment. So we're going to declare a data type, an integer, meaning a number, and let's give it a variable name A. And then let's give it an initial value. And let's say, ito example ganina, 5 and 6. So 5. And then for B, we're going to initialize it with 6. And then the third variable is sum. The value is A plus B. All right. That means whatever it is that the value of A and B, if we're going to add it, it will compute. It will display the value of the variable sum. So all we need to do is to display the value since the sum already computed. Na natay atong formula, na natay equation. The next thing that we're going to do is display the value. So how do we think we should do? Kung saan na to siya pag-display? Since we discussed na to last time. Gideon, go ahead.
I-declare ang answer katong C out da yung katong less than da yung sum.
Less than sum. That's right. Okay. So, and then last, return 0. All right. Don't you worry, guys. Just
Return
try to
0.
follow through. I'm going to discuss it to you one by one. All right. So basically, we've used variable A and B for our first and second number, and for us to compute the sum, we also use another variable, all right, which is sum in this case, and then the value of sum is whatever it is that the value of A and B added together. Okay. And then since we already have our computation here, we're just going to display the value. In this case, we use the cout function or object. And then let's save this variables and execute, compile and run. Excuse me. Nabugnaw na akong kape. All right, it says here that the answer is 11. Is it true?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Chadder
Yes, sir,
yung matidiri, sir.
Unsa?
Chadder ang matidiri sa programming kaysa kuan. Tong pre-cal.
Okay. Basic command, all right? Basic command nga programming. But soon, once you'll be doing with actual programming in the future, especially if you'll become programmer soon, dili lang plus imong gamiton. And right now, we're just going to deal with the easy mathematics. Our goal here is not math, but programming, man. Okay? All right. So what if, okay, let me just give you a general idea of, let's say, siguro an advanced idea. What if ganahan ko nga lahi-lahi nga number, just like atong gimong example ganina. So atong example kayo na is like lahat man nga number. So what if dili 5 and 6 ang ganahan? So let's try. We can either change this. Let's say 10, and then let's say 255. All right. Okay na. Let's save that. The same thing. Di na ta kinalang usbon ang ato ang formula. We just have to change the value of the variable, and then execute, compile, and run. It will still give us the right answer. 265. All right. So that's the good thing about variable, because we don't necessarily have to change the entire program. We just have to change the numbers that we're going to enter. And then it will automatically provide us the result that we want. Now, obviously, this is not the proper way on creating a calculator using programming. The proper way is this. First is we're going to remove the values. Do you have any question, Gideon?
Sir, what if kanang maog yun sa calculator sir ba nga like dito ko mo input og number dire kay sa program manaw dato gibutang. What
Yes,
if sa dito sa run na?
Right. Muna akong i-discuss. Okay. Thank you, Gideon. All right. So that's how we're going to do it. So we're going to remove the value because we want to enter the value on the program itself once we run it. So it's a little bit advanced. It will be discussed in the future lesson, in our next lesson, but this is how we're going to do it. So same thing, we're going to initialize the variable. We're going to declare or define our variables. We have A, B, that's for the first number, the second number, and then the sum. All right. So the first thing that we're going to do is we will let the users enter the value for us. That's what we want. So the first thing that we're going to do is, let's say, we're going to instruct the user. Enter the first number. So this time we are just using all right. So familiar ba man this is the cout. Basically, we've already discussed this last time. Basically, it allows us to output a text. So in this case, we just output an instruction that says enter the first number. So obviously, once the users read this, they're going to enter the number. So once they enter na siya of number, we have to set a command that those number will be saved in our variable. So whatever it is that the user will enter, it will be saved in asa nga variable ani, A, B, or sum. Asa siguro nga variable. So,
Okay, sir. A.
So we're going to
A,
let
sir.
it save. Dapat i-save na to siya sa A. So again, this is a little bit advanced. It will be discussed in our next meeting. We'll save it sa A. So that's how you're going to save it. So di ba cout, that's output. Ang cin is input. So whatever it is that the user will enter after this, the program will fetch it, yang sa lakon, o yang dawaton, ug i-save niya sa variable A, which is this. Okay? So once the user entered, once the program save it A, may na punta na cout, enter the second number, and then same thing. Unsa siguro yung like kang buhaton?
Magyapon, sir.
Magyapon.
CN.
And then CN and then B. All right. Now that we have values for A and B, and notice this is a little bit confusing. Yep. Ang cout is going to be open angle bracket. Cin is closing angle brackets. Okay. Please take note of that. It's going to be a little bit confusing. Pagbago pa, pero madugay maana dumani. And then once nanatay value sa A and B, do you think we can proceed with this? Napatay lang yung code, i-add na. What do you think?
Naa pa, sir?
Ano man?
Kuan ka ng enter the first number.
Ano mo tanong?
Sakto ba?
Na sir.
Sakto.
Alright, let's try. It's okay, guys. So, ako mataka-discuss ko dani good. So, medyo but it's okay. I think that's it. We'll check if napabay error. So, let's save that. Let's execute, compile, and run. Okay, here, it says enter the first number. So, let's enter a number. Let's say 1080. Okay, that's the first number. And then click enter. it will proceed to the next step. And let's say 19, 20. All right. So the moment that I'm going to click enter, this na ako yan, this dili sa. But the moment that I'm going to click enter, it will display the value of sum. And since the value of sum is a plus b, then automatically na siyang display whatever it is that the answer. So let's try. 1. Anong 1? Sum plus b. Anong 1 tayo sa? Enter 1. See out. Anong 1 ang answer? Hold on. Let me save this. Let's read execute kung parang run. May sagot nga number good. 12. Hold on.
I-enter pa nung ang ad. I-enter pa ang answer para ma-plus sila. Ay, ambot.
Dili na. Kay, na naman dire, oh. Alright, let's... Okay, ato na i-erase na daw. We're not gonna do it this way. We're just going to make the value of the sum blank. And instead, dire na lang. Dapat mo, gara na to siya direct. So, but it's okay. So, it's gonna be sum plus, sum is equals to A plus B. Right. Dili na, since we've already declared it. Let's try. So since we've already defined our variable, that every time that we're going to use sum, it's going to be an integer or meaning number. So after we enter A and B, it will compute this equation. That means it's sum is equals A plus B. Let's try. Okay, enter the first number. Let me zoom it in. Let's say 24 and 12 should be 36. All right. So basically, whatever it is that we're going to enter, it will automatically compute depending on the equation that we added. So let's try it again. Let's compile and run, and let's try to use any other number. All right. Let's say medyo complex gamay. Let's say 4, 5, 7 plus 1, 2, 3. 580. So that's it. Basically, this is how we're going to create a calculator, a very simple calculator, of course. But this time around, the reason why variables are very important is because bisag unsa nga number pwede natong i-enter without constantly changing the program every time. Anthony, go ahead. Okay. All right. That will be discussed in our future meeting. Okay. That will be in our future meeting. Let's do it one step at a time lang. For the meantime, let's understand how variables work. And then after this, we're going to create more complex programs. And then in our future, we're going to work with CN. And then, of course, mathematical arithmetic operations, just like just like addition, subtraction, division, so on and so forth. Ano lang sa, okay? Go ahead. What do you mean by input? Ang int is a data type. Again, we'll discuss it later on. Int is a data type, meaning integer. And integers are the programming terminology for numbers. So in programming, we will not call it numbers. Let's say 1, 2, 3, but we will call it integer. Anyway, we'll discuss it in just a moment, okay? So the reason why I'm showing you this for me to be able to show you how variables work. Let's just focus on the variables for now. So in this case, we're able to store, once we run this program, we can enter different numbers for us to compute from without changing the program itself because we used variable. That's the advantage of using variables. So let's try it again. Let me show it to you one more time. So this time around, let's try, let's say 1, 2, and then 3, 4. Oops. So we have our first number is 12. The second number is 34. The moment that we enter, it will provide us the sum. So what if I want a different set of numbers? So just let's do the same thing, compile and run. And this time around, let's try to enter any other number. Let's say kana siya and kana. So see, it will still provide us with the result without really changing. We don't necessarily have to change the codes. Using variables, we can just enter any numbers that we want, and we don't necessarily have to change everything. Ano wala ko makitang tao? Can you turn on your cameras again, guys? Please keep your cameras turned on. Go ahead, Anthony. Yes, but right now, since we're using int, it will not work. Muga na gyapon siya pero dili niya display ang decimal. Again, we will discuss about decimal points later on, okay? All right. Let's not focus on the numbers lang sa gyud. Let's focus on how we use variables lang sa, okay? Gigamitan rin ako og integer so that I can show it to you how variables work. Okay, let's not focus on the numbers for the meantime. Let's focus on how we use variables. So, like I said kanina, while we are doing an example, every time pwede natong we enter og lahi-lahi nga number. Nabantayan ninyo, once we enter a number, we don't necessarily have to change the code. Is that what you observed? Ba po ninyo na-obserbaran?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So we don't necessarily have to change the code every time that we will enter different numbers. It's because we used variables. So I want to ganado kong emphasize the use of variables in programming. Using variables, we don't necessarily have to change the entire code every time that we're going to deal with number. Go ahead, Hamlet.
Sir, anong ni gawas 1 to ganyan, sir, sa 4 digits?
I think it's just an error because we have to kinala akong gibuhat magod gaman akong shortcut because what mo taga-discuss. So I think this is what happened. Since we're still declaring declare pa lang nato ang variable, then gigamanan na ako computation. So that's why it provide us with kuan ra siya murabag in programming it's called a boolean. It's called boolean. We'll discuss it in the future. Boolean is a yes or no or 1 and 0. Okay? So since sum is an integer, if we're going to write it this way, our value example is 5 and 6, then the result is 11, right? Now, if we're going to write it this way, int sum, the compiler will think nga nangutana ba ko if ang sum ba integer ba siya or dili. And since the value is 11, mutong gibutang siya og 1, which is equivalent of yes. All right? So katong gibot ganina which himo na ko inani. All right? So since ang value, for example, ang value sa A and B is 5 and 6, then the value of sum is 11, right? In this case, ang nahitabo pagbasa niya ani nakaingon ang compiler kaingon siya nga murag nangutana ko if ang sum integer ba siya. So that's why it resulted 1, which is of course means yes. Okay? Nagets ra? I'm not sure if nagets ba, but that's the explanation, right? So the proper way in creating equation is to separate it good, just like this. Motong makuha na to ang correct answer. All right, let's proceed, guys, okay? So long as we're able to understand what variables are, that's really important. So again, we use variables for us not to constantly change the program every time that we will run it. So para magamit siya all the time ang atong program, especially if we're dealing with values or data, we have to use variables. Okay, so how do we write a variable? So that's really important. Unsa na to pagsulat of variable? So here are some other examples of C++ variables. So we have int. So obviously nakakita natin int kanina, and then age is 18. Then we have car, middle initial is equals to J, and then string, first name is equals to Ford, and then int result. So these are examples of C++ variables. So notice that the first thing that we're going to write is the data type, and then the variable name, and optional nga value. Right? So basically that's the syntax of a C++ variable. And of course, we should always end it with a semicolon. Always remember, every line inside our main function should always end with a semicolon. So how to write a C++ variable? So first is we're going to define the data type. And then we're going to write in the identifier, and optional na value. So this is optional depending on how we're going to use it in our program. Okay? But this is really important. First is the data type, identifier, and an optional na value. In this case, let's go and let's examine the first example. All right? So this is a syntax. This is how we write variables. So if we're going to take a look at this, we know that int is the data type, and then age is the identifier, and then 18 is the value. All right? Nagets na? Do you follow, guys? Int
Yes, sir.
is
Yes,
the
sir.
data type,
Sir.
and then age is the identifier, and then this is the value. Why is it optional, man? Ano siguro optional, man? When do we make it optional? Ano na lang? Okay, let me just answer that para madali na. The reason why it's optional is because as much as possible, we want our user to input the value of the depending on how we want to use our program. But in most cases, we want the user to initialize or to input the value itself. So that's why sometimes we don't necessarily have to put a value on our variables because we want the users to enter the value. Just like kato ato example, kani, here, we didn't initialize a value for A and B. It's because we want it nga ang user na mismo ang mo enter sa value kung i-run na ang program. Alright? Do you follow?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Right. So in some cases, we don't necessarily have to put value depending on unsa atong ganahan mo itabo sa atong program. So in this case, in this example, we have our int, that is the data type, and then we have age as the identifier, and 18. All right. So question, ang age, kaning nga age, can we use any other words aside from age? Pwede ba tamo enter og lain-lain nga word?
Kanara sir ay.
Di ba? Ang question ako is, can we? Pwede ba natong islan, if ever? Identifier?
Pwede.
Pwede, sir.
Pwede, sir.
Because the identifier is something that you will decide what to enter. All right? The identifier is something that you will decide ug unsay imong ibutang. However, the data type should always be ug unsay dapat. Or about given na siya. Pero identifier, it is something that you have to decide unsalan. So, for the next example, we have car or char. That is our data type. Our identifier is middle initial, and we initialize a value j. Same thing on the third, we have our data type, we have our identifier and the value, and then on the last one, we have data type and identifier only. Okay? So let's talk about data types. So we already know about int. Let's talk about the rest of the data types. So far, we have int, char, and string. A data type is a classification that specifies which type of value a variable has. It could be either numbers, text, paragraph, decimal points, etc. So mo na tong question gani about decimal points. It is very important which data type to use when creating a variable. Here are some of the most common C++ data types. We have character, and then the keyword that we'll be using it in programming is char. And then we have integer, that's int. Floating point or double floating point, that's if we're going to write it in programming, it is either float or double. And then we have string, and then we have boolean. Now, what exactly are these data types? So in our katong pagsugod nato sa klase ganina, I asked you to segregate the waste depending on its type, right? So we're able to segregate the different waste depending on its type. It could be either hazardous, biodegradable, and non-biodegradable. That's the same case here. Every time that we're going to deal with data, the first thing that we're going to do is to determine unsa siya nga type na data. That's the first thing that we're going to do. If we're going to create a program that will deal with data, the first thing that we're going to do is segregate the data. Not segregate, but identify what type of data that value has. So for example, since we're talking about the value is 18. So since this is an age, unsa man ang age, number man ang age, di ba? Wala man siguro ganang ang age is letters or something like that. Number man dyan ang age, ang value niya. So therefore, we will use integer. Integer refers to numbers. And then for middle initial, our middle initial is single letter man dyan na. Is that true? Middle initial are only one letters? One letter.
Yes, sir.
That's why we
Yes,
use char, because char or char is a data type for single symbol. And then for first name, most first name has multiple letters. In some cases, multiple words pa man gani. Alright? So since we'll be dealing with multiple symbol, multiple letters, multiple words, that is what you call string. Okay? So again, that's the first thing that we're going to do. We're going to identify, if we're going to deal with data, first is we have to understand, we have to identify unsa siya nga klase nga data. It could be either number, decimal point, words, etc. Okay? And these are the common data types. There are tons of napay mga laing data types, but these are the common data types that we will encounter in programming, specifically in C++ programming. We have character, integer, floating point or double floating point, string, and boolean. Let's talk about it one by one. Let's start with the character or char. It's called character, but if we're going to use it in programming, it's only char or char or char, however you pronounce it. It stores a single character. Always remember, it can only store single character, letter or number value. Kumbaga, loyal ang character. Usara jud ang iyang ganahan. Okay? So, single character, letter or number value, we will use char. So, it could be either A, capital letter, small capital letter A, X, Y, 1, and any other symbol, so long as it's only one. Okay? Remember, char will only store any data that is only one. Integer stores whole numbers without decimals. So, like I said a while ago, in programming, we don't call numbers, but if you want to talk about numbers that has numerical values, then it's called integers. That means we are trying to compute its numerical value. We will call it integer. All right? So it is int. Now, maybe you're wondering, anong na number dire? Nga, og usa ra ka number pwede tayo mogamit og 1. For example, we are trying to compute 1 plus 2. Di ba? Tagsa raman siya nga word at tagsa ra siya nga letter. Do you think we can use char? Since usa raman ang 1, usa ra pud ang 2. Do you think we can use char if we want to compute
No.
1 plus 2? Why is it?
No, sir.
Ano man?
Kay ang char is para sa alphabets.
Alphabet. Nakabutan diri is kwan man, single character, letter, or number value.
Pwede di ay, sir.
Ah? No, okay? If we're going, yes, we can input 1 and 2 using char, but we cannot compute it for numerical purposes. For example, muhatag ta og 1 sa atong character, then it will if we use, okay, for example, we're going to create a variable that says char, let's say num1 is equals to 1, right? So we can do it, of course. However, this number 1 right here has no longer numerical value. What do you mean by that? Di na to siya pwede ma-compute with any other numbers. Because nahimo ra siya nga symbol ra siya. Nahimo siyang character. Wala siya value if we're going to use char. Nagets ang idea? That means if we're going to use char for 1, we cannot compute it by adding it to any other number or something like that. So the compiler will iyahaning i-understand that this is not a number but is a mere symbol. So therefore, if we're going to use numbers, although bisag usara siya kabuok, but if you want to use it for computation, then we should always use integer. Do you follow? Nagets ra?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
I'm hoping it's also the same case with the rest. I'm only hearing a few people. Right. Again, char doesn't have any numerical value. Single symbol character with no numerical value. However, for integer, it stores whole numbers. Nilamil, go ahead. Do you have a question, Nilamil?
Napindot ra, sir.
It's okay. Ay, kalma lang. All right. Integer is whole numbers. What do you mean by whole numbers, guys? Okay. All right. It's true. It's not fraction. It's not decimal. So therefore, any whole numbers. Walay kapid, walay kulang. Just like this. 5600, and then 1010110. These are all integers. Meaning whole number, walay decimal, walay fraction. True. So that's it. It's not, it could be either negative or positive so long as it doesn't have any fraction or decimal points. And then we have floating point. It stores fractional numbers containing one or more decimals, sufficient for storing 7 decimal digits. All right. So actually, in this case, floating point and double floating point is basically they are the same thing. They only differ with the number of decimal points you can use. So if we want to use decimal points, yeah, ang kutob ra og 7 decimal points, then we can use float. For example, this one, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 ra kutob, then we can use float. However, if you're dealing with decimal point that has more than 7 decimal points, more than 7 decimal places, then we will use double floating point. All right. So in programming, we will use float or double. So these are the keywords, meaning kani ato importance sa atong code. So again, floating points are used for decimal points. Go ahead, Anthony. That's true. Okay, so that's a good answer. Most of the time, okay. Okay, ano na lang, the float will still work with whole numbers. Okay, let's put it this way. Ang float or double, even though it is intended for decimal point, but it will still work with whole numbers. So if ang imo program might deal with decimal numbers, then it's always safe to use float instead. Okay? If there is a possibility that your program may deal with decimal points, then it would be best if we can use float instead, float or double. Okay? Oh, kuan man kanus man na usually pag magamatag calculator, sometimes i-compute sa users nato kay na a decimal point. Therefore, instead of using integer that will only cater whole numbers, we will use float instead because float can work for both whole numbers and decimal points. All right, ana lang. And another example is, for example, if we're going to compute average. Okay, for example, although whole numbers ang enter sa user, let's say 5, 3, and 5, 3, and 7. Okay, sakto ba? So 5 plus 3 is 8 plus 7 is 15 divided by 3, so that's 5. How about 8? Okay, kani. For example, you have the average of 3 numbers. Although whole numbers sila puro, but if we're going to compute the average, so we have 8 plus 8, 16 divided by 3, it's 5 kapin, right? 5.3 or something. So the result is 5.33 or something like that. So this is already a decimal. So, diba? Although whole number ang gi-input sa user, there is still a possibility nga ang result niya is decimal point. Therefore, I would advise to use float if you're dealing with data that has the possibility of resulting, or let's say dealing with decimal points. Okay, did I answer your question, Anthony? That's actually a good question, guys. I didn't realize it until now. Okay, not a problem. So again, if you're dealing with a product, the product, if you're dealing with a data that has a possibility of getting it decimals, then it would be best if we're going to use float. So 5 plus 3 plus 8 divided by 3. 5.33 lagi. All right. So let's see. Although puro whole numbers atong gi-enter, it still provide us with a decimal. So let's anticipate whatever it is the value that we may use in our program, that we may deal with, and then use the appropriate data type. So that is float and double floating point. Unsa ito yung difference between the float and double floating point? Consecutive difference, anyone?
Float, sir, kay 7 ra ang digit ay double kay pwede daghan multiple.
15, in decimal places, okay? But most of the time, kanus ang mata mo kamaog program nga about 7 decimal places. But just in case if you'll be dealing with decimal places nga maabot of 7 or more, that's the time that we're going to use double. But most of the time, let's try to keep it using float only. All right, string stores more than one symbol or characters. This is good for words, paragraph, etc. To use strings, you must include additional header file in the source code string library. So this is something that we have to take note for us to make sure that the string, if you'll be dealing with string in data type, we should always include string. Diba? Before, kanira man, include IOStream. But if we'll be dealing with string data type, it's always best to add this, because in some cases there might be some chances nga dili kay siya mo work. So for us to be able to make use of the string data type, we have to add this to our header file instead of just the IOStream. Mo man ni pinakaunang nga line, di ba? Ang IOStream.
Yes, sir.
Remember?
Yes, sir.
We
Yes.
will
Sir.
add string
Sir.
if our program will use strings. So what exactly are strings, by the way? Strings are, again, stores more than one symbol or characters. So just like an example, if katong ganina, string. So we all know that car will only store one, but if it's going to be more than one, we will use string. So this is good for, let's say, first name, last name, address, etc. So long as it uses multiple letters or characters, we will use string. But again, for us to properly use string, every time we run it, we should always add it to the second line. So this time, we're going to include not just IOStream, but also string library. So this is ano lang. And then a Boolean. Boolean is something that we don't necessarily use that much, but it's mostly used for conditional statement or logical expression. So I cannot give an example for now because kung maghahatag ko example about Boolean, I know nga maglibog take. Anong naabot naman tag conditional statement na, sir. So for the meantime, let's just think of Boolean stores true or false value, meaning 1 is true, 0 is false. Muna nahitabo ganina nga 1 ang iyang gi-answer. It's because the compiler thought that I was trying to ask if the katong int, ang sum is integer ba siya. So that's why it resulted 1 because it's true na ang sum is an integer. All right? So right now, I cannot give you an example na dili makakause of confusion with regards to bool, but let's just say that Boolean is either true or false. It's like mostly it will be used for conditional statements or logical expressions, and that will be discussed in our future lesson. Okay? Nato na any question?
No, sir.
All right. So again, how to write variables? So we're going to write the data type and identifier, and then optional na value. So do you have any questions so far with the data type? We only have 5 for today. We have character, integer, string, floating point, double floating point, and Boolean. So far, do you have any questions? Or maybe naamoy laing na types nga you are confused. Anthony, go ahead. I know, strings, every time that we're going to add multiple words, we're, katong ganina, as an example, this one right here, this is also a string. Because a string is group of text, group of letters, group of symbols, something like that. So this is also a string. But for variables, it's also called string. All right? So basically, asa man second.
Katong include string, sir ba?
Oh, kani kay wala man tagagamit og variable nga string yet. Bantay ta, wala man tayo variable nga string. We only use string as a text output. But if we're going to use with variable, for example, we're going to use string here, string, then let's say, sample lang, result. If we'll be doing this na, it will still work, by the way, the IOStream, but in some cases, it may not. So that's why we have to always include. If we'll be dealing with string variable, that's the time that we're going to add include string. Okay? Because kabantay mo, ang int ni highlight ni line ang color, pero ang string wala. Okay? So therefore, there's something wrong with the string that we have to declare. There's something different, not wrong, but there's something different, which is I don't know yet. Nga nung wala siya ga-highlight, di ba dapat tanang variable, data type should highlight, for example, car. Alright, mo-highlight yun na siya. Float. Pero ang string delay. So there is something different with string that we have to write an additional na library. Okay? But we'll only use this, we'll only add this if we'll be dealing with variable na string. Okay? Did I answer your question? Okay, next, let's talk about identifier. So pretty much in creating an identifier, it would be totally up to us. We can write whatever we want. We can, yeah, so long as it has letters, something like that. But there are a few things that we have to think about when writing the identifier. Di ba? Kita rin bahala, di ba? It's called variable name, identifier. An identifier is a user-defined word used to represent the variable. So the first step is to define the variable, the data type rather, and after that, we're going to declare the identifier. And it is something that user-defined, meaning, okay, user-defined, meaning ikaw, ang user ang bahala unsa iyahang ganahang ibutang as identifier. Programmers can either use any words or string of alphanumeric characters as identifier. When you say alphanumeric, it's a combination of both alphabet and number. Identifiers must always start with an alphabet. That's the first thing though. Even though we can use whatever identifier we want, but it should always start with an alphabet or underscore. It shouldn't start with any other symbols or numbers. So for example, okay, to use identifier, it must be written after the data type. So if this is our data type, this is the identifier, A. Another example is float and an average. A and average are the identifier for the data types int and float. So instead of the I, we can write whatever we want, so long as it should always always start with an alphabet or underscore only. Therefore, if we're going to write a data, if we're going to data type kani, let's say, which kani number 1 is siya. All right, int 1a. Do you think this is valid? Is this valid? 1a, our identifier. Okay, nga naman. No, like I said, this is our data type. All right. Again, always remember whenever we write a data identifier, it should always start with alphabet. But since we started with number, therefore this is invalid. Okay. How do we fix it? We can either add.
A1.
Pwede na itong butangan og underscore sa sunugdanan. All right. So again, identifier should always start with an alphabet or underscore. Other than that, it would be an invalid. Another invalid variable identifier is this, for example, float, let's say, all right, kanina na. Okay, so do you think this is valid?
No, sir.
No, because at is no longer, it's not an alphabet. Since this is a symbol and the only symbol that is acceptable is underscore, therefore this is invalid. Okay, so this is an example of data types or identifiers that we created a while ago, A and B, and then sum. So since all of them are alphabet, starting with alphabet, it is fine. Okay, while you can choose any words as your identifiers, there are words whose meaning is already defined by C++. Like I said a while ago, you can use whatever identifier, you can use any words as identifier, pero naay mga exemption. There are some words whose meaning is already defined by C++. Therefore, you cannot use it as identifiers. So these are called C++ keywords. So these numbers or these words cannot be used as identifier. So mora dyan siya. You can use whatever it is. You can use your name as your identifier, but you cannot use these ASM, auto, bool, so on, because these words already has a meaning inside C++ compilers. All right. Just think of it. Maybe you can take a screenshot, and every time that you're going to create an identifier, make sure nga wala ni. So meaning we cannot use false, float, for, friend, go to, if, inline, public, register, and so on. Do you follow? Nagets siya?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Go ahead. Ano siya magamit ng comment? What do you mean? Sige, gaya ko na kog situation. Gaya ko na kog situation. Comment. Hey, no, this is only for variables. We can use this to, pwede natong gamiton ni sa tanan nga mga words for any other purposes. Let's say, ganahan ka mo add og comment, ganahan ka mo add og string, like instructions. But if we cannot use this as identifier, so let me clarify this. Kani cannot be used as identifiers. Identifiers. So we can still use it for any other purposes. Let's say ganahan ka mo add og text, mag-see out ra ka og text, we can still use like this, template, throw. The only thing that we cannot use it for is identifiers or our identifiers. So for example, variable. Let's say int this is equals to 9. All right. So this is an invalid variable. It's because we cannot use this as identifier, as stipulated here. Okay. Another example. Float. Private equals 5.9. Is this valid or not?
Not.
Okay, it's invalid. It's because private is a predefined identifier. So again, we can use whatever identifier that we want, so long as wala ni nabutang. But we can use it for any other purposes. Let's say kinahan ka mo see out. Let's say okay, see out. This is a private switch. Private switch. All right. Is this okay ba ni? Now we have this. We have private and then switch. Have this private.
Okay ra, sir.
All right. Ngano okay ra gani ni siya kay?
Dili man siya identifier, sir.
That's true. All right. You got it. Okay, so long as it's not used for identifiers, then it's fine. However, we cannot use all of this as identifiers. Same gyapon. Si XX Droid. It's in general man siya nga C++ na language. All right. Okay, so here, although we've already discussed it, but let's summarize what we've already learned. So in writing a variable, it is three. It's about 3 Ds. Okay? Definition, declaration, or DDI. Definition, declaration, and initialization. So these are the 3 ways, the 3 steps in writing a variable. The definition, declaration, and initialization are the 3 steps in writing a variable. Let's start with definition. Definition is simply defining which data type to use depending on the value. So the first thing we're going to do is identify unsalan nga value ang atong gamiton. So for example, we're going to create a program that will list down all the ID numbers of students. ID numbers. Ayan na lang ID kay usahay ang ID na ay alphanumeric. So let's say mo list down siya sa tanang ages, mga edad sa mga students. So if we'll be talking about age, what should be the proper data type? If it's age.
Int, sir.
Okay, int. All right. So the first thing that we're going to do when we write variable is to define what data type to use. Okay, depending on the value that you're going to deal with, you have to select the right data type. So that's definition. Okay. All right. Another example. What if magawa ka program that will list down the address sa mga students? What should be the data type to use?
String, sir.
Okay, string. It's true because strings are words or paragraphs. So first thing that you're going to do is define which data to use. Another example, if it's gonna be, let's say, ganahan kang i-compute ang average nga allowance, daily allowance sa mga students. What would be the data type?
Double.
Pwede float, pwede int, sir.
Okay, but the best dili mo pwede kay pwede. We have to make sure of the one that is really that's the best good. Unsa siguro when we talk about money.
Float, sir, float.
Silver double. Okay, it's because money will tend to give us decimal points, especially if we're dealing with the average of daily allowance of all the students. So obviously naa siya possibility nga mahimo siyang decimal, therefore we will use float. All right, so that's the first step in writing a variable. We have to define the data, the type of the data that we'll be dealing with. That's definition. So pilihan ra nato aning actually kanirang upat. In the future we'll be encountering bool, but let's just include bool kay basig mangluod siya. So we have int, char, float, double, and string. Okay? And then declaration. Declaration is writing the variable identifier. Right? So once you already declared or defined which data to use, which data type rather, the next thing that you're going to do is to declare an identifier. Identifiers must always start with an alphabet or underscore, and to use an identifier, it must be written after the data type. So just like in our example, we have data type and identifier. So once you already know which data type to use, then the next thing that you're going to do is to declare an identifier. So like I said, you can use any identifier that you want except of these words. Except any, you can use every identifier that you want. However, aside any exception, it should always start with an alphabet or underscore. Meaning, dili siya pwede mag-start of number, dili siya pwede mag-start of any other characters. So only the acceptable only is alphabet and underscore. Kana iyang starting ba? And then, okay, identifiers must only include one word. Should you desire to put multiple words, you can separate them by adding an underscore, a hyphen, or just write them in a single word. All right. So in writing identifier, it should always be one word only. So for example, first name. We all know that if you want to use first name as identifier, we all know first name is two words, diba? So one very good tip is to either separate them with an underscore or just write them down in one single word, tangtangon rin mo ang space, or you can add a hyphen. Just make sure na mahimo ra siyang one word ra gyud ang imuhang identifier. So like I said, if you'll be dealing with, for example, first name, dapat duang ta siya ka word, but just find a way to make it one word, like adding underscore or just remove the space or adding a hyphen. It would totally up to you. All right, and another thing to take note, wala na ako nabutang, I don't think nabutang na ako ni, is that C++ is case sensitive. Wala na ako nabutang sa ako ang, oops. What do you mean by case sensitive? Anyone? C++ is a case-sensitive programming language. What do you mean by case sensitive. Any idea? Please take note. Take down. Huh? So, good, Anthony. All right, sensitive kayo siya. Dali kayo siyang sakitan. All right. When you say case sensitive, thank you, Anthony. But what meaning sa case sensitive is, first is what is case? Diba? Natay uppercase, lowercase, diba? Uppercase, lowercase. Muna pasabot nga cases. Uppercase, lowercase. What do you mean by uppercase letters? For example, kani. Capital letters, that's atong common word. And then lowercase is kani. C++ is case sensitive, meaning kung unsay diyon sa nimo siya pag-declare, if it's gonna be in capital letters, you can only use it for capital letters for the entire program. That means this one, for example, our identifier is age, right? This is not the same with kani. So these two are different because C++ is case sensitive. Therefore, age with capital letter A is different from age with with small letter A. Okay, so that's what you call case sensitive. Meaning, depending on how you use, whether you use it for capital letters or lowercase, they will be given with different meaning, different value. So another example is, for example, kani, let's say case. If you use this as the identifier, this is a different identifier. Sino wala man? Nawala? Basig na kay na pin, i-click ra ng kanang pin nga icon. Basig na kay na pin nga lain. I'm not sure. All right. Anyway, nag-gets your idea sa case sensitive, guys? Meaning, if we're going to use an identifier that is capital letter, it's gonna, although same siya, for example, case and case, like, same siya og di ba, letters, pero the first one is capitalized, the second one is not, they are still different. All right? So please take note of that. C++ is case sensitive. Nag-gets your idea sa case sensitive?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Gamay, sir.
Sa gamay ra. Again, take note nga kung giyon sa niyo siya pagsulat sa imong identifier, make sure nga same po nimo paggamit for the entire program. So if this is how you, for example, first name, if this is how you write it in your identifier, make sure nga inani po nimo paggamit sa imong program. Otherwise, it will not work. So, for example, first name is different from this. Small letter first name. That is not the same. Okay? And then lastly, initialization. It's setting an initial value to the variable. Although this part is optional depending on how you're going to use it. So for example, int A is equals 50, int B is equals 40. So this is only necessary if you want to be very specific with the value. If you want the value of your variable to be specific, meaning specific siya ba, then you're going to initialize it with certain values. But most of the time, we will let our users enter the value for us. But again, the optional step, which is, the next step is initialization. Basically, you're just going to initialize the value of your variable. So when you say initialize, you're going to give it its first value. But still, since it's variable, it can still be changed all throughout the program. But the initial value, for example, in this case, is 50. Yung mo na pinakauna niya nga value. Unlike if wala ni, our variable A doesn't have any values at all. We will just base it with how the users enter or what the users enter. All right. And however, the initialized value must agree with the data type it defines. What do you mean by this? The initialized value, it must agree. Must agree jud ang term. Pwede glaing nga term. It's okay. Siguro katulugon kay ko gagamaanay. So it's okay. The initialized value must agree. What do you mean by that? So siguro kasabot ana. Or match. Okay, match na lang siguro kay murag mas better siya. The initialized value must match with the data type it defines. So for example, in this case, We use 50. Is this a valid value for integer? Go ahead, Anthony. Go ahead. Sige, 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 sure. All right. Is this a valid
Pin mo siya.
as the value for variable A? Is this valid? It says here, the initialized value must match or must agree with the data type it defines. Go ahead. Guys, napag mo. All right, is this valid? 50. Anyone?
Yes. Yes, sir.
Nga naman?
Yes, sir. This is a valid.
Nga nang valid man kay? Remember, int are for numbers. Since 50 is number, therefore this is a valid. However, muna gipasabot na ko adere, the initialized value must match with the data type it defines. So for example, we'll write int A is equals to let's say average. All right, is this a valid value?
No, sir. No.
No.
Ano naman?
No, sir.
Go ahead, Nila, go
Ay,
ahead.
dili man
It's
sa
a
number, sir.
All right, so that's what I meant when I said the initialized value must match with the data type it defines, because average is not an integer, therefore this is not a valid value. So same thing, you have to make sure that if you're going to initialize a value, it should always match with the data type it defines. All right. So format. So how do we write an initialized value? There are different ways to do it depending on the data type. So each data type has its own way of setting values or initializing a value. If char or car, the value must be enclosed with a single quote. For example, char middle initial is R with single quote. Take note of that. Again, each data type has different way of setting values. So for char, it should always be enclosed with a single quote. And then for string, the value must be enclosed with double quote. All right. So for example, string full name Tony Stark, it should always be enclosed with double quotation. So pag car, unsa lang ganito? Pag one single character lang using car, how do we write the initialized value?
Kuan, sir,
Single
single quote ra.
Okay, single quote ra. But if it's string, double quote. Take
Double
note of
quote.
that.
Double quote.
Alright, di ata pwedeng di ata possible nga magkasayop sa'yo sa pag-initialize of value. So again, if it's just character, just one single quote. If multiple, two quote. The best way to memorize it, since we know that car will only store one single file or one single character, then one single quotation pod. Since string can store multiple letters, then it's gonna be two quotation. Ano lang, I think that's the best way to memorize it. And for int, float, double, and bool, there are no need for enclosure. So no enclosure for the value. So for float and integer or any kanang nasa numerical value, then there's no need for enclosure. We're going to enclose it only for char, that's with single quotation, and for string, double quotation. Gets?
Yes, sir.
All right, take
Yes,
note
sir.
of that.
Yes, sir.
All right, and there are two formats in declaring and initializing variables. Number one, all variables can be declared and initialized separately. For example, here we have two integers. Natay duwa ka integer. So we can either write it this way, meaning int A, int B. We can use it separately. It's perfectly fine. Or number two, variables with the same data type can be declared together, but it must be separated with a comma. So another example is, this is the first this is the first way, first format. We can just write them individually. However, if it's going to be the same, if both A and B variables have the same data type, which is int, we can just write it this way. Int is A, comma, B. The compiler will automatically know that both A and B are integers. But this will only apply if both of them have the same value, same data type. For example, another example is float. So for average and result, both of them are decimal points. Therefore, we can just write it this way: float average, comma, result. All right. So that is the two-way on in writing or initializing or writing a variable. So in declaring a variable, if pwede na itong siyang binagsaon, but those who have the same data type, you can write it in a single line separated by a comma. And always end with a semicolon. All right. So let's have a practice activity. Anay, gibutang naman ako daan ang variable dere. All right. Let's have another one. Let me ask somebody from the class a program that displays the user's first name. This is an example. Can anyone please give us another example? The string is, na naman eh. Nagbibutang naman ako ang answer na good. Nagbibutang man ako. Dapat i-question man tanako ni. All right, so it's okay. So we have a program that will display the user's first name. So how do we write the variable? So the data type is string, of course. And then the identifier that we'll be using is first name. Therefore, if we're going to write it in a variable, it's going to be string, and then first name, and then we can initialize the value, let's say Tony. And since it is a string, it is enclosed with double quotation. Okay, do you follow?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Program number 2. A
Yes, sir.
program that displays the user's first name, last name, and age. So what are the data types that we'll be using? We have string for the first name and last name, and then integer for the age. Our identifiers are first name, last name, and age. And for us to write the variables, we have string first name, string last name is, for example, this, and then age 50. All right. And then program number 3, a program that displays the sum of two numbers. So the data types that we'll be using, since sum man atong gipangita, so we are safe with decimal points. Therefore, we'll be using int for the first and second number, and then sum. Identifiers is num1, num2, and then sum. And the variables are int num1, num2, and then sum. Or we can, like I said, we can either write it in a single line, since we've already, since all of them are int or integer, or we can write them separately. Alright, supposedly, kamo mo tayo muhatag ano niya. Balong, anong gibutang na ako ang answer direkta. Alright, anyway, that's it for today. For your assignment, I'm going to give you this. You're going to write variable lang. For the meantime, just write a variable. You don't necessarily have to create a program, but you're just going to write the variable for the following program. The first is a program that displays the quotient of two integers. Okay, so what are the variables? What are the data types that you're going to use? You're going to declare your own variable, and then you can also initialize if you want to. And then second, a program that displays your first name, middle initial, last name, and address. Right? What are the identifiers? So this is how you're going to write it, by the way. Okay. So first is you're going to write the data type, identifier, and variables. So each number, you'll have 3 groups of answers. So for example, number 1, a program that displays the quotient of 2 integers. Therefore, your answer should be like this: data type, and then, so for example, number 1, data type, and then identifier, and then variables. All right, so dapat nanani yung answer, okay? And then number 2 and number 3. Nag-gets ang assignment?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right, so
Sagasa, sir.
pag-asa na, basta mabasa na ako.
Yes, sir.
Basta mabasa na, klaro. All right, and then I'm going to upload it on our Google Classroom. So you can, if you'd like, if ganahan ka mo try, you can Pwede nimong buhaton gagama kag program kani para ma-practice po mo. Pwede po mo gagama og program. You know what? I think you should create a program na lang. Okay. Additional upat na yung answer na upat. Ang ikapat is ang program itself. So each item you'll have 4 answers. One is the data type, identifier, variable, and then the program. So you're going to create a program that will display the quotient of 2 integers. Since most of this are okay, all right. Output ratanan. Ay ra sa mo gamit og int atong cin. Output lang tanan since output pa lang atong na-discuss. So therefore na ay 3 output per number, 4 rather. The data types, identifier, and variable, and then the program. And then for number 2, same thing, data type, identifier, variable, and a program. So basically, you're going to create a program that displays your first name, middle initial, last name, and address. So you don't necessarily have to use CN, guys, okay? So just initialize it. For example, your name is, akong name is Julius, middle initials are Publico, and address, Bahay City. So I'm just going to initialize it because here you can write identifier and initiate the variable value on your own. Ano lang. Ayaw mo gamit og CN since wala pa nandot nato na discuss. Right? Do you have any questions? Anthony, go ahead.
Yes, sir.
Oh, 1, 2, 3. 1, kani, like I said, upat output kada number. Kaya na, 1 week bitaw ang assignment. So you're going to list down the data types that will be used. Then you're going to list down the identifiers, write down the identifiers, and then write the variable, and then the program. Screenshot lang ang program, screenshot ra gyapon output and input.
Okay, sir.
Code and output. And then for number 2, list down the data types that you're going to use. Then write down the identifiers and then the variables and then the program. Just compile it in nasa yun na ako mabasa, guys, okay? Kanang mabasa ra po na ako dali. And then for number 3, list down the data types to be used, write down the identifier, write down the variable, and then attach the screenshot for your program, both the code and the output. Then deadline is gonna be next week.
Next meeting, sir.
Next meeting, right?
For Friday.
Next meeting, right? October 19. Anyway, you can still submit. Bahalag malate mo. Pwede na mo ka mo submit yapon, pero itag na nako as late. So if mo submit mo after 19 next week, I will still accept it, but it will be tagged as late.
Pero
So,
wala
but-
ang lagay minus, sir.
Nay minus, of course. Nay minus ang late. Usually, I deduct 5 points. Good. Sa tanan ako mga na-checkan.
Dakuha lagi ng deduct, sir.
Oh, Jud, harong make sure nga mga students will make it
Yes, sir.
on
Sige,
time.
sir.
So,
Sir,
charong malate paghapon. Man.
Kita sa bulsa.
Karon wala pa na ako, to be honest, wala pa na ako na-check ang mga assignment, guys. Right now, to be honest, wala pa. I'm planning to check it all together during midterm. Kaya na may sem break, na may kanang, kumbaga, not sem break.
Nami sim break, sir?
Oh, pero after the semester pa. What I mean is, kuan ba? Na-silent week ba? Na-silent week.
okay.
A week before the midterm.
Oh, why?
Yes. A week before the midterm, and the midterm itself, it's called silent week, meaning dili magklase ang mga instructor because you'll focus more on the midterm or just the midterm itself. So during that time, if dili ko makaklase, that's the time that I'm going to start checking your assignment. But for your assessment activities, katong Google Form, automatic naman po siyang mo-check on its own. Kabantay mo pag-check sa result, pag-submit ninyo na na-result dayon, di ba?
Yes, sir.
So,
Bayan
sir,
yung percent dili.
before midterm, sir, nami pa Hawaii.
I think so. Yeah, I think so. Based ako among nasulayan before, na what you call silent week. It's not really something that
Murag silbi tuon na, sir.
review na siya. Pero depende rin po sa instructor ninyo, guys, okay? Depende rin po sa instructor. But the university will give us silent week. That
1 week
is
ra na,
only
sir.
1 week. That week is intended only for reviewing. So the other instructors will meet you for 30 minutes. Depende na just to give you pointers. That's fine lang. Or depende rin po sa instructor. But generally, ideally, katong face-to-face pa mi sa una, ang silent week is sometimes meet ang teacher only to give pointers. So most probably 30 minutes lang. And then the students will be given the rest of the day to review. Then
Okay,
on
sir.
the midterm or final examination week itself, wala na dyan klase. Inyo rang attenan ang katong mga klase nga mo exam mo. That's during face-to-face. So now that we are doing online class still, so I'm not sure, pero it will depend on the instructor lagi hapon.
Okay,
But
sir.
for me, actually, next week naman ang midterm or next week. So I'm
Next
only
week.
going to give you a silent week on the midterm itself lang, on the actual midterm week lang. Okay?
Lunes
All right.
na.
So do you have any questions before we end?
Wala.
May mga questions?
Wala na, sir.
Let me stop the attendance now. So that's a total of 1 hour 49 minutes. Let me stop the recording too. And if there are no more questions, kindly more questions.